Jey Uso's Intercontinental Championship win seemingly came out of nowhere, which was a pleasant surprise in a landscape of WWE television that can sometimes be a little bit too predictable. What I'm seeing as far less predictable is looking at the future outlook of the Intercontinental Championship and Jey Uso as the Intercontinental Champion and who can actually be the one to dethrone Jey Uso. So I'm gonna throw a bunch of names your way and I'm gonna try and make a good case as to why they should be the ones to dethrone Jey Uso, and then you can tell me whether you like the option or you hate the option. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel, ring that bell for notifications. If you're a wrestling fan, I know you're gonna fall in love with his YouTube channel because we always upload daily wrestling content. All right, folks, let me show you the options I got. Let's start things off by talking about the guy that's currently circling the waters around Intercontinental Championship Island that's currently inhabited by Jey Uso, the badass Bron Breakker. Bron Breakker, kind of out of nowhere if you ask me, lost the Intercontinental Championship to Jey Uso, an Intercontinental Championship that I thought Bron Breakker was going to have a legendary run with. Because up till that point, Bron Breakker, although his championship run was short, was being treated like he was an uber megastar and protected as such, which is kind of why the Jey Uso championship win was so damn awesome, because it really just sideswiped pretty much all of us and came out of entirely nowhere. And they did kind of make it seem like Bron Breakker was on his way out of the Intercontinental Championship picture. They did that entire babyface turn between Bron Breakker and Jey Uso, and we even had a moment where Bron Breakker faced off against Gunther, really signaling that he was moving on to bigger and better things and wouldn't really be a player in the Intercontinental Championship picture in the near future, and thus not a danger to Jey Uso's reign. However, kind of seemingly unexplained, and just like his loss out of nowhere, Bron Breakker is right back in the Intercontinental Championship picture and right back to being heel, it seems, and I'm perfectly okay with it. I don't love when the WWE does these championship reigns where the champion loses and then the champion that was never gets that championship opportunity again. I'm kind of looking at, Kofi Kingston losing in 5 seconds to Brock Lesnar here. So I'm glad that Bron Breakker is still in the picture. The question is he the guy that should ultimately dethrone Jey Uso? And I think it's a really easy answer to just say, yes, I do believe that Bron Breakker has the pedigree to be the guy to dethrone one of the most over babyfaces in the company. And if your plan is to make Bron Breakker one of the biggest heels and most dominant heels in the company, well, then him defeating one of the biggest babyfaces in the company for one of the most coveted titles in the Intercontinental Championship is a good way to do it. But then that begs the question, why lose it to Jey Uso in the first place? You could say that Jey Uso is really holding this championship to further develop the storyline that he has with the Bloodline. And maybe it's just a matter of time until the Bloodline gets involved during a match between Jey Uso and Bron Breakker to cause Jey Uso to lose the match and thus making Bron Breakker the new Intercontinental Championship. I feel like that could be just a natural transition and an easy way to bring the title right back to Bron Breakker, all while you develop the storyline between Jey Uso and the Bloodline. So I think when you're looking at serious contenders, I don't think that it gets more serious than Bron Breakker, not only because of timing with things that are going on with the Bloodline that could cause Jey Uso to lose due to outside interference, but also the fact that Bron Breakker is one of those guys that could absolutely benefit from toppling a top babyface, again, if the plan is to make him a top heel. So should he win the Intercontinental Championship? I feel like that's a bit more of a subjective question if you ask me, because I don't know that he necessarily needs to win it back. I don't think that he lost any aura of his badassness because he lost to Jey Uso. I feel like pretty much all of us were kind of interested in just kind of content with the fact that he was going to move on to go do other things. And we're also not upset about the fact that he's come back for the Intercontinental Championship prize. So could he, those are both separate questions. Could he? Absolutely, 100%. Should he? I'll kind of leave that one up to you, because I think you can make the argument for either side. He shouldn't or he should. But the fact of the matter is that Bron Breakker is got to be considered the front runner for the Intercontinental Championship when you look at the current landscape of the division and the feuds that Jey Uso currently has laid out. This is a 2-for-1. We could look at both Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods being major threats to Jey Uso to dethrone him as the Intercontinental Champion, mostly because the Intercontinental Championship prize, if it were added to either one of these two, would really elevate the feud that we currently have blossoming on Monday Night Raw between members of the New Day, Kofi and Xavier. Because Xavier's entire motivation right now is the fact that he feels like the outsider of the New Day because he's the only one that hasn't won any major accolades. He's the only one that hasn't won singles gold. And the fact that Kofi has, the fact that Big E has really just sort of damaged the psyche of Xavier Woods to the point where he's kind of on the fringes of turning heel, and pretty much the entire motivation is that he feels like he hasn't accomplished enough in his career at this point. Now, if you were to give Xavier Woods the Intercontinental Championship, then I feel like that might be a little bit premature. I feel like if you're going to give the Intercontinental Championship to either one of these two, I actually think that the right option would be Kofi Kingston because it gives Xavier Woods the full motivation to entirely just turn on Kofi Kingston, go full heel, and go after the Intercontinental Championship prize, a singles prize that he so desperately covets at the moment. Now, in terms of connections between the New Day members and Jey Uso, it's there. We just had Xavier Woods have an Intercontinental Championship match with Jey Uso, and don't forget that that match used to at one point belong to Kofi Kingston. So maybe at some point Jey Uso gives Kofi that match. Not only are they in proximity to each other in terms of storytelling, but on top of that, there's a lot of history and a lot of lore between, of course, the Usos and the New Day. They go back a lot. But more than anything, the reason why I think this is an intriguing option is because all of a sudden that Intercontinental Championship becomes an awesome plot device to really elevate a blossoming feud that's happening right before our very eyes between Xavier Woods and Kofi Kingston. The IC title would make this feud absolute must-watch TV in a match that, dare I say, I would love to see at something like a WrestleMania. But I have to admit, it is kind of difficult right now to picture a world where either of these two dethrone Jey Uso, especially Kofi, considering he's also babyface, Jey is babyface. Maybe Xavier makes a little bit more sense with Xavier kind of teetering the line. Maybe they have a rematch and that's where the bloodline gets involved and costs Jey Uso the championship, and somebody that's kind of morally wavering like Xavier Woods would happily take the help if it means him finally achieving what he wants to achieve, which is singles gold. So I don't hate this for either of these guys. I think it really elevates current storytelling, and that's kind of what we're looking for when we look at championship changes. Karrion Cross kind of fits the story that we just talked about, but I'm far less convinced in this because it seems like Karrion's motivations don't really lie in material goods. It doesn't really lie in gold and singles accolades. It just sort of lies in watching the world burn as he causes these relationships to entirely deteriorate before our very eyes with the sweet words that he sings in these people's ears, like he did with Xavier Woods, like he's currently doing with The Miz, like he's done in the past with Shinsuke Nakamura and more. But it would be kind of interesting if all of this groundwork that Karrion Cross has been laying is so that he could take advantage of a situation and put himself in the front seat for an Intercontinental Championship feud. I mean, look, we have a traditional heel in Karrion Cross with a faction and a babyface in Jey Uso that could use a feud against a faction to make him look even better. So I could actually see down the line seeing Karrion Cross and Final Testament taking on Jey Uso as a feud for the Intercontinental Championship. I don't see this being a non-feud, but I don't see Karrion being a realistic option as a champion here. I just feel like what we've already talked about, Bron Breakker and the New Day are just far more intriguing options in terms of what you can do with them as champions. And I just don't really see as much of an intriguing path should Karrion be the guy to become champion. We could talk about Uncle Howdy if you'd like, but this one I hope they entirely stay away from. I do think that there is a possibility down the line for us to get Jey Uso versus Bo Dallas and the entirety of the Wyatt family, because we have seen what their motivations are to go after people that have turned their back on family. And you could make the argument that Jey Uso did exactly just that. And who knows, maybe with the current storytelling that we have right now, maybe Roman and Jimmy go to Jey to ask for help, only for Jey to turn their back on them. And maybe that's the catalyst to bring out the Wyatt Six and Bo Dallas to make Jey Uso see the way of his troublesome decisions. It could be kind of like a Christmas Carol where the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future make Ebenezer Scrooge see the error of his ways and then ultimately becomes a babyface by the end of A Christmas Carol. Maybe that's what will force Jey Uso to go back and fix things with his family, a short feud with the Wyatt Six. Look, I don't hate that. I like the idea of the Wyatt Six targeting Jey Uso. I feel like there's something really interesting there and something that was alluded to when we didn't know initially who they were after, Jey Uso or Chad Gable. So there's already intrigue amongst the fans that want to see this. What I don't want to see is any sort of gold whatsoever on the Wyatt Six. In my opinion, that was kind of nail number one on the coffin of what they did with The Fiend's booking, giving him gold, giving him something materialistic, because all of a sudden he went from this greater being that just wanted to see chaos happen to just like me and you, an individual that yearns for glory. And I just don't want to see that personally from Bo Dallas or the Wyatt Six. I like their motivations to be entirely spiritual and nothing that seeks personal gain or glory. So could I see a feud between them and Jey Uso? I can. I just don't want to see Bo Dallas or any member of the Wyatt Six winning any sort of gold. This right here is a really, really intriguing option if we're looking a little bit further into the future. Let's say that Jey Uso holds the title for a while. I think that Dominik Mysterio all of a sudden does become a pretty strong player in being the one to dethrone Jey Uso. If you want to do it in the short term, yeah, you can still have that Bloodline X Judgment Day pact that they made about a year and a half ago on Monday Night Raw. Maybe that comes back into play and Solo's Bloodline helps Dominik Mysterio win the IC title from Jey Uso, thus giving the IC title to the Judgment Day and Dominik Mysterio, while also being the inciting incident as to how Jey gets back into the story with the Bloodline. But more than anything, like if you want to do this well past the story of the Bloodline, I think you can still make it work, mostly because Jey Uso is such a beloved babyface and Dominik Mysterio is quite literally staring into an opposite mirror in being the most hated heel in the entire company right now. Like, I'm just thinking of the crowd reactions that we would get if these two were facing off against one another for the Intercontinental Championship. It would be a legendary crowd. And Dominik Mysterio, I do think right now has the tools in terms of his heel arsenal to be able to pull this off, because he has a Liv Morgan that helps him get away with victories, and now he has added muscle in Raquel Rodriguez to help him even out the odds when he's the weaker one in the picture. But more than anything, I just think that having one of the top baby faces dethroned by one of the most hated and detestable heels that you could make the argument doesn't deserve the championship because he's going to cheat his way to win it. You can make the argument of nepotism. Meanwhile, Jey Uso spent 14 years trying to get the championship glory. It would be poetic to have the heel who barely put in any work compared to Jey Uso climb that mountain in far less time. But I just think that Dominik Mysterio as a mid-card champion at some point, if it's not dethroning Jey Uso, is a must. I absolutely desperately want to see him as a mid-card champion. He did such a great job of being just the most punchable piece of shit heel when he was the mid-card champion in NXT as the North American champion, and I'd love to see a similar run as the Intercontinental champion. Now, if you want to give this championship to somebody that's become a serious threat and somebody that frankly has earned the ability to take the mantle of being a champion in the WWE, I don't think that you need to look much further than Bronson Reed, a guy who in just the last couple of months has just catapulted himself in the eyes of wrestling fans as a guy that you absolutely must watch every episode of Monday Night Raw. Not only is he putting on really intriguing matches and just chaotic storylines, but he is now at that point where he kind of hit the influx of main event, where you can absolutely use him in a main event caliber story or a top tier mid-card level story, and he is a credible contender in any of those situations. I think if you were to compare Bronson Reed now to Bronson Reed, say, a year and a bit ago, that Bronson Reed from a year and a bit ago would have just been a stepping stone for a babyface to make them look stronger. Now, I think that this is a Bronson Reed that could take that babyface and just eat them, because he's been built so well, both from an in-ring perspective and from how he's being booked from a storyline perspective as well, that he's just a credible threat to everybody, which is why the next person up against somebody like a Bronson Reed is a cornerstone pillar of the WWE in Seth Rollins. So if it's good enough for Seth Rollins, then I think that Bronson Reed is good enough for Jey Uso and good enough for the Intercontinental Championship. I feel like when I look at everyone that we've talked about, if Jey Uso can hold this for a while, he might be actually the biggest threat beyond, like a Bron Breakker. When you see somebody elevate themselves the way that they have, like a Bronson Reed recently, you want to see them be rewarded for their awesome efforts. And I think that the Intercontinental Championship would be great alongside this meat factory. This might have been an option in a different lifetime. We can talk about Drew McIntyre. Does Drew McIntyre have the ability? Does he have the skill? Does he have the popularity, the notoriety? He has it all, of course, to be Intercontinental Champion. He might have a little bit too much, to the point where I think that the Intercontinental Championship would be a significant downgrade. If this was a year ago, then I think that we're talking about Drew McIntyre being the front runner. Don't forget that Drew McIntyre's the catalyst of his entire current heel run started because Jey Uso joined Monday Night Raw and everybody seemed to be hunky-dory, happy, kumbaya, my lord with it, except Drew McIntyre. Drew McIntyre was the only one pointing out, Jey Uso used to be a piece of shit that made our lives horrible. How are you guys not seeing this? And it was this mania moment, and not WrestleMania, like a manic moment that Drew McIntyre started going down that ultimately led to this awesome character that he's built, this cynical bastard of a human that will rip your head off in order to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. Yeah, right now, this Drew McIntyre, you put him up against Jey Uso, both in terms of star power, narrative, and what you want to see out of a WWE superstar, you probably go with Drew McIntyre. But Drew McIntyre has elevated himself so much that it almost feels like going after Jey Uso would feel like a meaningless Skyrim side quest when this guy should be positioned as a front runner, not only to be in a major place for WrestleMania, but for going after world championships, and dare I say even be the one to retire John Cena if Randy Orton's not available. That's how much Drew McIntyre has elevated himself, and I just don't think that a diagonal downwards move towards the Intercontinental Championship and Jey Uso is the right move here. I think there could be an intriguing argument to be made about Sheamus, but I don't love this either right now. The argument that you can make about Sheamus is the fact that since he's come back, he's had eyes on the Intercontinental Championship, but every time he sets eyes on the Intercontinental Championship, something distracts him for several months, just like Butch/Pete Dunne did right before Sheamus was going after championship gold. So there is unfinished business for Sheamus when it comes to his motivations of 2024, which is to become a Grand Slam champion, to win the Intercontinental Championship. I think that this is something that will happen, but I just don't see it happening around the time that Jey Uso is champion. So I don't see him dethroning Jey Uso. I absolutely see him becoming an Intercontinental champion within the next year and a bit, but it's tough to make the puzzle pieces fit in a feud between Sheamus and Jey Uso at the moment. I don't know if that's necessarily something that I'd like to see. Because, you know, Jey Uso, one of the most likable baby faces, Sheamus, one of the most likable, most respected baby faces on the roster right now, unless you're gonna pull the trigger on making Sheamus a heel, which I don't think that the WWE needs right now. They have plenty of these big, powerful, strong, meaty men as heels already, that Sheamus is a nice change of pace in having one of these big, meaty men as a babyface. So I don't love it as him being the one to dethrone Jey Uso, but I do see him as a Intercontinental champion sooner rather than later. This is kind of where things get intriguing, because a lot of things would need to be shifted in terms of how championships are defended for the next couple to even take place. We have Solo Sikoa. Solo Sikoa being the current leader of the current iteration of the Bloodline, what many of us call the Timu Bloodline. I just don't think that this makes sense, but I do foresee Solo and the Bloodline getting involved in a situation where Jey Uso loses the Intercontinental Championship, thus that being the inciting incident to make Jey Uso finally realign with Roman and Jimmy. I just don't think that it makes sense for Solo to be going after top championship gold after the Undisputed Championship, becoming tribal chief and holding on to the Ula Fala. It just doesn't seem like the correct character motivations and the right material goods for somebody like Solo Sikoa to currently be going after. But I am predicting, frankly, that at some point or another, Solo, little brother Solo, will be involved in a match that costs Jey Uso, big brother Jey Uso, the Intercontinental Championship. Now, if you want to keep the championship in the Bloodline storyline in this entire saga and have Jey Uso lose in a way that can be impactful to further developing the Bloodline storyline, not that it needs any help further developing, but then we could look at Jacob Fatu. Jacob Fatu is a beast. I don't think that anybody would bat an eye if we made the decision all of a sudden as WWE creative to give Jacob Fatu a major championship. I think everybody would be like, shit, yeah, this guy's awesome. This guy's a beast. Absolutely, you can put gold on him and we wouldn't question it. But out of everyone in the Bloodline, he kind of makes the most sense because we already have the Tongans as tag champions. We have Solo wearing the Ula Fala. If you want to really drape the Bloodline with gold, you give Jacob Fatu the Intercontinental Championship, and then it's like kind of collecting the Infinity Stones for Solo Sikoa's Bloodline. Again, we would need to kind of fundamentally change how we expect championship matches to take place. Like, how can we have Jacob Fatu versus Jey Uso even happen? How would that even be booked? What would come about from it? So there would need to be a lot of storyline directives shifting us that way for us to get here. If we do get to the point where this could be a realistic match and feud that could happen, I actually think this might be the best available option. Again, the problem is that we're several steps away from getting to that match and having it make sense. But if we get there, then I love the idea of Jacob Fatu being the one to dethrone Jey Uso. I mean, we're talking Bloodline. I'll throw this out there because it's kind of hilarious headcanon to have The Rock all of a sudden jump in and be like, it's gonna be Bloodline rules. Look at you now, Rikishi. Look at you now. Look at your son, Rikishi. You did it for The Rock. Well, The Rock is doing it for The Rock. It's gonna be Bloodline rules. The final boss. He can say all of those things. And if he were to win the Intercontinental Championship, it would be so groan-inducing. Everyone would hate it, but that might be what they're going for, because if the plan is to make The Rock a dastardly evil piece of shit, which he already was, then this could be another way to make him a dastardly piece of shit. And it would be hilarious if he walked around with the Intercontinental Championship like he does with his fake little jabroni Target belt, pretending like it's the top prize in the game. Imagine The Rock pretending that the IC title is the top prize in the game. There could be something interesting there. I don't want to see this. Like, if we're going to get the Bloodline involved, out of everyone that I talked about Bloodline related, I think it should be Jacob. But folks, thank you so much for listening to my head ramblings. This was like bugging me as I was trying to like fall asleep. I was like, wow, where the fuck do we have Jey Uso lose the championship? And I just took these brain ramblings and made them into a regurgitating of words video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Okay, I'm out, but get out of here.